We are going to be in Psalm 75 tonight, so you can open up there. And we are continuing our series through some of the Psalms, 7 Psalms. We're looking at 7 different Psalms, and these are 7 Psalms for giving thanks. These are 7 Psalms that are focused on giving thanks, and we get, as we've been looking at these Psalms, we get the reasons why thanks is being given to God. And tonight is no different. I'm excited about, I'm really enjoying this series, but I am excited about each one of these because I'm learning something new, and tonight is no different. There's definitely something new in here that we learn about praising, about thanking God. So we'll get into it here. I will show you, for those of you that like to take notes, this is how it is broken down. There are only 10 verses in this psalm, but don't worry, I can teach for too long. Anyways, giving thanks is the first verse, so it's broken up into 2 main divisions, 2 main parts. Verse 1 is giving thanks, so we'll see that right away. And then for the remaining verses, verses 2 to 10, we will see that God is the judge. And really, that really gives away the reason for this psalm. The giving of thanks is because God is the judge. Those are the examples that are used, but we'll get some specifics here as we get into it. But you'll notice in verse 1 says this. It says, to the chief musician, to the chief musician. So this was written so that it could be used for corporate worship. Corporate worship is what you and I just did. It means that we gather in a group and we worship together. So this was written or given to the chief musician so that it could be used for leading worship. And it was set to do not destroy. What in the world is that? Well, that was evidently a song that was already in existence. These lyrics were written and set to that song. Interesting, for those of you that take notes again, you like this kind of, I was going to say weird stuff. It's not really weird stuff, but these little tidbits of info. The same tune that do not destroy was in Psalm 57, 58, and 59. So this is not the first time that it was used, but it is used here. And then, check this out, it is a psalm of Asaph. So up until now, we've been reading psalms that were written by David. And most of them were written by David, but we do have some other writers. And here's one of them, Asaph. Now, we know from other parts of Scripture, in the Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, mentions Asaph. We know that Asaph was one of the religious leaders. He was one of the worship leaders. Obviously, we learn here that he was a psalmist or a psalter or a songwriter, a worship songwriter. And here we're told that this psalm is a psalm of Asaph. And then it tells us that it was a song. And that's really what a psalm means, that it was, it was a song. And so Asaph wrote this, which is interesting for us to, in a sense, break away from David. Not that we want to break away from David, but it is neat to hear someone else's perspective. Now, who is this Asaph? Now, you're going to need this information as we get into the verses here in just a moment. When we get down to the second part of our study. But you need to know this. Let me show you. I've actually got it on the screen for you. In 1 Chronicles 25:2, mentions Asaph. It says, of the sons of Asaph. So he had some sons. Zakur, Joseph, Nethaniah, Asherellah. The sons of Asaph were under the direction of Asaph. So Asaph is the worship leader. Thank you, Caleb. The sons of Asaph were under the direction of Asaph, the worship leader. And then look what it says about him. Who prophesied according to the order of the king. So, he's a worship leader. He's one of the leaders. But he was also a prophet. He prophesied according to the order of the king. But that's not the only time it mentions that. Actually, in 2nd Chronicles 29:30. Moreover, King Hezekiah, wonderful story about him, and the leaders commanded the Levites. That's familiar for some of us. Those of you that have been coming on Sundays, we remember learning about the Levites, servants in the temple, tabernacle. the leaders commanded the Levites to sing praise to the Lord with the words of David and Asaph the seer. So there we see that Asaph was on the same plane as David as far as songwriters were concerned. Singer-songwriter, one of the original singer-songwriters. So they were leading worship with the words of David and of Asaph. And then notice what it says, Asaph the seer. Asaph the seer, what is that? Well, seer is somebody who sees or has vision. But it's one of the words that was interchangeable or synonymous with prophet. It's somebody who would see the future as God would reveal it to that individual. And Asaph, apparently, as a worship leader, also as he was writing worship songs, and again, we're going to see that here in just a moment, perfect example, as he was writing songs, being inspired by the Lord, was also given some prophetic words or prophecy from the Lord to include in the worship song, which is incredible to think. So, let me show you as we move on here, the giving of thanks in verse 1. And again, it's just verse 1 is our first main division. And it starts out, we give thanks to you. O God, we give thanks. Now, Asaph is writing we because this is a song that was written for corporate worship. Again, group worship. Everybody gathered and they would sing together. So he wrote this with that in mind. We give thanks to you. And then, oh God, we give thanks to you. So it's clear who he's giving thanks to. It is to God, right? He says it right in the middle. We give thanks to you, oh God. Now you'll notice he wrote it so that it is speaking directly to God himself, which is obviously one of the major characteristics that we want to be evident in our worship. That should be really the main point, that as you and I are worshiping God, that we're not worshiping or singing for the person on our right or on our left or behind us or in front of us. But what we want to be doing is singing directly to God. So when you and I gather on Wednesday nights, on Sunday mornings, and we worship together, that should be one of our main goals as a group, but also as individuals. That as I'm singing, man, I'm actually singing to God here. So we give thanks to you, oh God, we give thanks. So as far as our theme is concerned, the 7 Psalms for giving thanks, there it is right there in verse 1. Immediately, he's thankful. Now, here's where we learn something new about being thankful. Because he tells us in verse 1 what he's thankful for as he's writing. This is what he or they as a group are thankful for. For, the word there, F-O-R, so that means because. So we're giving you thanks. And for, or here's why. Now notice this. Your wondrous works declare that your name is near. Now, I did not put up a subpoint. Normally, those of you that are here all the time, you know that I put some subpoints in there. I did not put a subpoint, basically because I didn't have the room to type, to fit all that in there. Here's the reason why he's giving thanks. He's giving thanks because God's wondrous works declare that his name is near. That's the reason why he's giving thanks. What does all of that mean? Well, it means that the wonderful works that God does, the wondrous works that God performs, the wonderful things that he does, those things declare that God's name is near. Now, don't get thrown off by that. His name is near. Well, his name is near, but he's not. Or no, when we read that his name is near, that would indicate that he is near. If you've got a favorite celebrity, and maybe you go to, Comic-Con or something or whatever, some kind of convention, or you go somewhere and you know that there's a celebrity there, and then you start to hear, so-and-so's in the building. You start to hear their name. When you hear their name, it's an indication for you that that individual is there. There's a phrase that I still hear from time to time, although I don't know how many of you have heard it, but, Elvis is in the building, or Elvis has left the building. And people have been using that for years. You know, it was used, years ago to announce that Elvis is in the building, and so when you hear the name of that individual, you know that, okay, they're nearby. So though it says your name is near, it doesn't mean that it's just his name, but that he, God, is near. But the wonderful thing is that this is what he's thankful for. He's thankful that your wondrous works declare that your name is near. So he's not just thankful for the wondrous works. He's thankful that those wondrous works are indicating that God is near. So he's thankful for all of that. And that's pretty neat. We learn something new. Because for most of us, we probably thank God, we're probably very thankful to God for the things that he has provided. The stuff that I have. God, thank you for my shoes or my clothes, or thank you for my parents or my dog or the food that you provide. Thank you for the car that we have. Thank you that we have money to go on this trip or whatever. We thank God for the stuff, and we ought to thank God for the stuff, the things, the belongings that we have. But we learned something new tonight, that we're not just thanking God. This is something else that we can thank God for. Not just the stuff that we have, but the fact that when he performs some wonderful work, we can be thankful for that. But the fact that that wonderful work proclaims him. It declares that he is near. I was talking with a friend last week, right before before last Tuesday, before the election. The election ended, really. I say ended because everybody was voting early. But I was talking with someone that morning, actually, and we were just texting back and forth about what was going to happen that day. And I was thinking about how, and I mentioned this on Sunday, how Romans tells us that God chooses leaders and puts them in their places, in their positions. And how that most likely by the end of that day, we were going to know who God chose. Now, that does not mean, I have to say this, I have to include this, that does not mean that every leader that God chooses, that he approves of their behavior or of their lifestyle or their actions. In fact, it is true that God, and we see examples of this in the Bible, in fact, it is true that God will at times choose leaders to lead people that are not living according to his word, that are not living in obedience to him. Oftentimes we see that in the Old Testament, where he would choose a leader as part of his judgment on that nation. So he would actually choose a leader because he was going to use that leader to judge those people, to discipline them. So don't get into your mind that, God, this person got elected, so that means that God chose them, so that means that God approves of everything that they do. That is not the case at all. In fact, it's very, very hard to find a godly leader in our world today. And yet we know that according to God's word, he still does the choosing. He still puts them in place. And in fact, we're going to see that here. We're going to see some confirmation of that here. We give thanks to you, O God. We give thanks for your wondrous works. Declare that your name is near. Matthew chapter 1, verse 23. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. That was quoted from Isaiah 7:14, which is translated God with us. Emmanuel, God with us. So this is a wonderful reminder. Jesus was born, and he was with us. In verse 1 of our psalm, the wondrous works declare that God is near, or God is with us. So what a wonderful thing to be thankful for. The fact that God's wondrous works are reminding us that God is near. It's a wonderful thing to remember for difficult times, when you're going through a difficult time, to remember that God is still working. And if God is still working, then that means that God is near. Now, we move to the second part of our study, which is where we see God the judge. And this is where, now we're going to see something very interesting here. Beginning at verse 2 and down to verse 5, we are going to see, let me get it up on the screen for you, we are going to see the testimony of God. Now, I told you at the beginning that Asaph, we learned from 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles, that Asaph was not only a psalmist or a songwriter, but that he was also a prophet. And that prophecy that he would receive from the Lord would be included in some of his songs. Well, here what happens is that as he is writing this psalm, evidently God spoke to him or spoke through him. And we have that recorded here. Because part of this worship song is God, the testimony of God, God testifying about himself. And so it says in verse 2, when I choose, so notice the language changes. When I choose the proper time, I will judge uprightly. Now, that's not Asaph. Asaph doesn't know what the proper time is. And he can't necessarily judge uprightly, at least not like God can. This is God making the claim. So God is here speaking through Asaph in the middle of this song. And here's what God says. God says, when I choose the proper time, I will judge uprightly. Now, this is a wonderful thing to remember. And the point under that is that God is declaring there that he really is the perfect judge. Because he does it at the proper time, and when he does it in the right way. Now, one of the things about God that I don't want to say frustrates me, he doesn't frustrate me. I understand what God's doing, you know, in delaying his judgment oftentimes. But sometimes to me on my, you know, in my human puny brain, you know, on my timetable, I'm thinking, oh God, you're taking way too long. And I try to, you know, counsel him and tell him he's taking too long. He doesn't ever listen to me. But we find out here why that is. Why does God sometimes seem to take so long? Well, that is because he knows the proper time. And he tells us plainly here, when I choose the proper time. When I choose the proper time. Some of you like to cook. Some of you like to bake. And I just thank God for you all the time. Especially because the holidays are coming up. But you know exactly, you might be cooking and you might have a couple different, 2 or 3 different things going on. But you know the proper time. When something needs to go into the oven, when something needs to be mixed, when something needs to be put into the mix. You know the proper time. God knows the proper time. And he says here, when I choose the proper time, I will judge uprightly. Now, sometimes we see people doing things, again, that might be against God's word. They might be violating God. They might be sinning against us. They might be treating us badly. And we might be praying and saying, God, would you please take care of this? And maybe it seems like God's not taking care of it. But just because God didn't immediately do what we asked him to do doesn't mean he's not answering the prayer. We tend to think of an answer as being something immediate, where oftentimes with God, an answer is something that is a process. Because God's not just, he's not just, think of yourself as a cook or a baker. He's not just cooking one thing at a time, he's cooking everything all at once. And he knows the proper time to answer. And when he judges, he'll judge uprightly. Leave that to him. Let him do that. I know that's hard. Because oftentimes, it might be somebody's bothering us, man, or they're whatever, they're, you know, just treating us badly, and we just think, you know, Lord, I'm asking you to take care of this, but it'd be real easy for me if you want, Lord, I could just go over there and just punch him in the nose right now. Would you like me to just take care of it? It's always going to be better when I let the Lord take care of it, because the Lord will judge uprightly. I may not judge uprightly. I may not judge right. I may judge wrongly. And so it's always right and it's always good to let him do it. As far as being a judge, he's the perfect judge. But he's not just the perfect judge. We see that he is also a powerful judge in verse 3. Verse 3 says, the earth. So he doesn't mess around. He doesn't say, you know, the United States, or Israel, or, you know, the Middle East, or Egypt. He just says the whole earth. The earth and all its inhabitants are dissolved. What? Now, what does he mean by that? Does he mean, were all the inhabitants dissolved? Well, obviously not, because you and I are still here. The point that God is making there as he speaks through Asaph is that he has control over the whole earth. And that our lives, and we know this from the book of James, right? That our lives are like a vapor of smoke. They're here one day, they're gone. Think about how fast this year has gone by. I mean, we're heading into Thanksgiving already, right? Within the next week and a half. We got Christmas right around the corner, New Year's, it's just cranking. It goes so quick. Our lives are like a vapor of smoke. And that's what God is pointing out here. The earth and all its inhabitants are dissolved. And then look what he says in verse 3 at the second part. I set up its pillars firmly. So God is indicating that he's the one that has total control of the earth. And it stands or falls by his decision. And he says at the end of verse 3, and I love this, Selah. That word means pause. Why would he say pause? Because listen to what he just said. The idea is that you and I, as we're singing this song or reading these lyrics, that God is speaking and God says, the earth and all its inhabitants are dissolved. I set up its pillars firmly. I need to pause and consider that. It's like reading through James, and when you hear, our life is a vapor of smoke, you need to pause and think, what exactly does that mean? It means that my life is here one day, gone the next. That it's fast. That it moves. That my life here on this earth is not forever. And reading this in verse 3, I need to pause and consider this and allow this to sink in. The earth and all of its inhabitants are dissolved. And then God says, he declares, I set up its pillars firmly. I'm the one that set it up. I have full control over it. You ever think about that? That my life is I've got life or breath in my lungs because God is sustaining me. You ever think about that? Like what's keeping the breath in my lungs? What keeps me breathing? You ever been standing at the beach? I love to be at the beach. You ever been standing on the shore, feet in the water, looking out at the ocean? It's absolutely terrifying. And I know you could talk about, there's gravity or the pull of the moon and all these different things, but you stop and think, what's keeping all of that water out there and not up here? It's the way God designed the earth, the way God designed the universe. And there's a low tide and a high tide. But the tide, for the most part, stays where it's at. Obviously, sometimes there are storms and the water comes way up where it doesn't belong. But God's got full control over it all, and I do not. Now, verses 4 and 5, they go with that section on God being the perfect judge. You can see there I marked it as verses 2, 4, and 5. Look what it says in verses 4 and 5. I said to the boastful, this is God speaking, the boastful, the proud. I said to the proud, do not deal proudly or boastfully. And to the wicked, do not lift up the horn. Verse 5, do not lift up your horn on high. Do not speak with a stiff neck. Now, why is God the perfect judge? Because in verses 4 and 5, he's even warning the wicked before he disciplines them. He's telling them, hey, you need to stop before you get judged. That's what he's doing. He's the perfect judge. He warns before he passes judgment. And he warns them, saying to the boastful, the proud, that means the proud, don't act prideful. Knock it off. And to the wicked, do not lift up the horn. Now, and he uses, again, that word horn in verse 5, do not lift up your horn on high. We mentioned that in our last study. In Isaiah chapter 5, verse 1, I told you that it's used, the word horn is used to describe the summit of a hill. But as it's used here, it's a horn like the horn on an animal. I watch PBR, like to watch PBR. I've been to go see PBR live a few times over the years. And oftentimes they will cut down the horns of the bull so that they're not pointing and puncturing somebody. But still, even oftentimes with those that have horns, even though they've been cut, they can do some real damage to the riders. That's the idea. And he's telling them, do not lift up the horn. And then in verse 5, again, he borrows from the farming community. Do not lift up your horn on high. Do not speak with a stiff neck. Don't talk proudly. Don't be proud. That's what he's saying. Don't be prideful. But by saying do not lift up your horn, it's the picture of a farm animal, like an ox or a bull, something like that, with horns. And the farmer would be trying to put a yoke on the animal so that the farmer could control that animal and have that animal help with the work, and that animal be raising up its horn at that farmer, trying to kick against that farmer or buck against that farmer, or trying to do its own thing and not do what the farmer wanted to do. And he's saying you need to not be a stubborn bull, a stubborn ox. Stop doing that. So he's a perfect judge, because not only does he judge, yes he does, and he's a perfect judge, but also in that he's warning those that he's about to judge. Isn't that wonderful? That when we are living in disobedience to the Lord, that he will still, because he loves us, that he'll warn us. What a wonderful thing. No wonder Asaph was so thankful. Now, it moves on here into verse 6, where we get the testimony. Let's move on to the next screen, where we get the testimony of Asaph in verses 6 through 9. And what he's telling us here, did I put it up there? Let's see if I got it up there. There it is. That positioning comes from God, verses 6 through 8. Notice the word for in verse 6, that means because. Exaltation, okay? There is, might be the King James Version, but it uses the word promotion, which I really like. But exaltation, same thing. But we can think of it as promotion, getting a promotion. For promotion comes neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge in verse 7. What does that mean? It means that when I'm getting a promotion, that it is God that's giving me the promotion. It means that I'm not getting that promotion myself. Though I may be a good worker, a great worker, a hard worker, that it's through my hard work that God is giving me that promotion, giving me that position. Verse 7 makes it clear, but God is the judge. God is the judge. He puts down one and exalts another. So notice, he's the one that positions the people. Verse 7, he puts down one and exalts another. So it's God that does the positioning. God does the positioning. Now, you may be a great worker. And I know that many of you have jobs. Others of you you're in the middle of getting a job, or you're getting ready to get a job. And soon you'll be texting me and saying, Pastor Chris, can I put you down as a reference? And I always say, you can use me as a reference unless you're going to stop coming to church. Because if you're going to stop coming to church, forget about it. Don't use me. Or I'll talk to your boss and go, hey man, this is a terrible worker. Don't hire them. But some of you will be texting me saying, hey, can I use you as a reference because you're in the middle of getting a job? Some of you are going to be great workers. And you're going to get a promotion. You're going to get a little more money. You're going to be moved from, the French fries to the front counter or whatever, and you're going to get that little bit, hey man, I get paid 5 more cents or whatever. You and I need to remember that promotion came from God. And you may be the greatest worker that the company's ever seen. And that's a wonderful thing. And God, in fact, does use our hard work and our good work and our labor, and he will reward that, but it's him that's doing it. So don't ever think, well, you know what, I got this promotion on my own, I didn't really need the Lord. No, it was the Lord who did it. Even if I was the one working, he gave me the ability to do the job. So promotion doesn't come from the east or from the west or from the south or anyone else. It's not even from me. It comes from God. He puts down one, he exalts another. Verse 8 says, for in the hand of the Lord there is a cup. That's what Habakkuk said. Let me put this up here for you. Habakkuk said, you are filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink and be exposed as uncircumcised. And then look what he says. The cup of the Lord's right hand will be turned against you. He was obviously speaking judgment over the people there at that time. But the interesting part for you and I is that evidently the Lord has a cup in his right hand. Now, does the Lord actually have a cup that he actually holds in his right hand? No, it is symbolic. But Asaph uses the same language here, the same picture. For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup. What does this cup have in it? Well, he says here, and the wine is red. Okay, it's got red wine. It is fully mixed. Got it? And he pours it out. All right, so God is serving wine. All right? Surely its dregs shall all the wicked of the earth drain and drink down. So it's not until that last sentence where you and I realize exactly what this is. This is a cup of judgment. Jesus spoke of a cup of judgment. Remember that in Matthew 20:22. But Jesus answered and said, you do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink? And he was talking about the cup of judgment. So evidently he understood also that God had a cup of judgment. But in our text here, we learn that it's going to be used as judgment for the wicked of the earth. And it's dregs. What is a dreg? I don't know if you have that word in your Bible, New King James Version. I've got it. It actually means the sediment or the scum at the bottom of the wine barrel. So the picture is that God is mixing this wine of judgment. He's giving it to the wicked to drink, and he's going to have them drink it all the way down to the very scum at the bottom of the barrel. Nasty. Nobody wants that stuff, right? But they're going to get it. They're going to experience it. Why? Because they've been wicked. Because they've been living in disobedience to the Lord. But Asaph finally in verse 9, let's go back here. Asaph finally in verse 9, his testimony includes an acknowledgement that positioning comes from God, but also he wants to end with praise in verse 9. He says, but I, notice the word but. That means that there's a change in direction. He had been talking about judgment, but I will declare forever. Forever. I will sing praises to the God of Jacob. Now, did you notice the combo? He says, I will declare forever. What's he going to declare forever? The praises to the God of Jacob. That's the God of Jacob or the God of Israel. Those names, Jacob and Israel, are synonymous. But how did we start out in verse 1? We will give thanks. We will give thanks. Thanks, and then in verse 9, singing of praises. We've seen those same phrases or words used in the previous Psalms that we've covered up to this point. So now in 3 Psalms, we've seen that same pattern. There's giving thanks and singing praises. And Asaph confirms that. But I will declare forever, I will sing praises to the God of Jacob. So it's good to thank God. It's good to sing praises to him. Finally, we finish off the psalm, perfect way to finish off the psalm, with God speaking, all the horns of the wicked I will also cut off. In other words, taking away their power. But the horns of the righteous shall be exalted. The horns of the righteous. What a wonderful promise. That God will choose the time, the perfect time, and he will judge uprightly. And he will, in fact, judge the wicked. And he will also reward the righteous. God will do that. You know, it seems to us like, as we look around society and, you know, just kind of the Hollywood crowd or, you know, entertainment world, it seems like they're just getting away with so much wickedness. And we think, man, God, like, I know these people are not living right, so when are you going to judge them? Well, God is going to judge He's going to choose the perfect time, or what did he call it? He called it the proper time, and he will judge uprightly. So he's going to do it in his time. And when he does it, he'll do it rightly. We, if we had our choice, we'd go out and we'd say, you know what, let's just judge everybody right now. But here's the thing. We never know who's going to get saved. And you might look at that Hollywood crowd or that entertainment world or, all the leaders of the world that seem to be getting away with wickedness. And you may think, Lord, why don't you just judge them right now? But you never know who is going to get saved out of that crowd. And I know it seems like, oh, none of these people could ever get saved. But you don't know that. Because we don't judge uprightly. God judges uprightly. And so it may be that some of our favorite entertainers, favorite musicians, singers, whoever, actors, actresses, whatever, it may be that, yeah, they're not saved. And you may be thinking, man, I wish that this person was saved. Well, maybe God is going to save them. He'll do it in the proper time. He'll judge uprightly. And the wicked that never turn to God and are always wicked, he'll judge them also when the time is correct, when the time is right or correct. And he'll do it uprightly. He won't do it like we do it, with a hard heart, with bitterness. He'll do it in the right way. Let me mention a few things before we break for small groups.